Dnipro, Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions. Not just the heads of the regional police, but also the deputy heads of prevention, the crime prevention police, the patrol police, and even internal security were called. And they created a filter so that weapons didn't move from frontline territory to other regions. Unfortunately, this is a common situation in every country where there is a war.
How many illegal weapons are in people's possession?
In October alone, we registered more than 2,000 cases when law enforcement has seized illegal weapons. Since the beginning of the year, we have detected and registered more than 8,000 of these offenses.
Dnipro, there was a very tragic situation. The police came to the scene of a crime and were attacked with a grenade. How did the police protect themselves in such a situation?
This is a very unusual situation. We need to understand this because it isn't a question of the police's innocence or guilt. When a perpetrator throws a grenade into a locked room with a stairwell, everyone there is affected. We already had a similar situation in Chernihiv when the robber approached the cash register at a pawn shop with a machine gun and took money. We pursued him for a few days and he put up armed resistance. He threw a grenade at the assault team and some of the special unit employees were wounded. These officers are in critical condition. They probably won't be able to work in the police force anymore. This is a war in the state. Previously, crime was fairly weak, without grenades. But now, and where exactly do these grenades come from? And how can we make sure they don't fall into peaceful regions? This is a big prevention job.
On the murder of our colleague Pavlo Sheremet, why did you classify all the case files?
So that what the investigators did and didn't do wouldn't be a topic of discussion, because it doesn't bring beneficial information to the public. First of all, it undermines the investigation. The perpetrators of these crimes have not been detained.
How did our colleague's film help you?
We called this story Working on Our Mistakes. The film gave us an impetus to fix the mistakes we had made. And then they started accusing us of classifying everything. On the contrary, we maintained constant contact with all the participants in this project.
Has the investigation progressed since the film?
Suspects have not been identified.
As far as we know, more than half of the officers in the special forces regiments worked in the police before. They worked during the Maidan revolution. Some of them committed crimes. Some of them saw crimes being committed, but did not prevent them or testify about them at the prosecutor's office. Nevertheless, these people continue to work for the police. Why do you need them?
I've also been in the police for more than 2 years. Ukraine's constitution protects all citizens, and neatly saying, you're all bad because you're like this, is that democratic? Are these the values that we fought for? There is an investigative body that is investigating, and the National Police plays an active part in investigating these offenses. They report often on the progress of their achievements publicly enough. And what about the fact that there are dozens of police investigators working there, that there are dozens of operatives there? It's a simple fact. Conducting any investigation and ensuring first and foremost the security of the investigators conducting the investigation, this is what the special forces are doing.
This department of the Prosecutor General's office that is investigating the crimes on the Maidan repeatedly said that the police did not contribute to or poorly facilitated the investigation. Secondly, they claimed that 15,000 police officers testified to a few dozen people. Thirdly, we have a case with the employees of the Kharkiv police when they were suspected of crimes on the Maidan on February 18th. They were taken to the police. They beat journalists who were already in police status. Then the courts charged them for the mismanagement of the Kharkiv police, and they later fled to Russia. Do you really need such people?
You answered your question yourself. The police are not a monolith. This is an organization made up of 140,000 active employees, citizens of Ukraine. And we don't have a general opinion that everyone must think this way. There are managers at each level, and the managers make decisions in accordance with the rights that the managers have. No one can be singled out as a criminal without the proper procedures.
Це не буде досліджено і прийнято рішення суду щодо до всіх. А тепер давайте...
This is true, but how do I as a citizen feel safe if a police officer who ought to defend me is committing a crime and being protected by the leadership of the police? As a citizen, in this case I feel fear that I can't be safe.
The fear passes with time. At present we have 2,000 Special Forces employees, and they perform an important common function. These aren't just words, these units have existed, they're still here, and they will continue to exist. In Kiev, there are now 2 regiments of special forces, and it was my decision to create one more in order to provide protection and public security in the city of Kiev.
We have with us Yevhen, who is, for a number of years, is monitoring the police and now the police reform. So following the interview with the head of the national police, what really are the most important things to understand? Like, to what extent it's successful? We understand there are some movements with the patrol police. Now there are some small steps with the reform of the criminal police. But really, what the people should understand?
First of all, Patrol Police, it's a real good case about the reforms at all, because all other initiatives, they just plans. What should be reformed to have better police, better policing? And what about criminal bloc? After 3 years of reform, we didn't do anything with it. The detectives, which announced by Serhiy Knyazev, is just a pilot project in some regions, but not the real unit which works now. First of all, what I have to say is that police reform is slow-going reform, and we really don't know the direction of this reform, because police doesn't have any policy, any strategy, any document in this sphere how to reformate them. Firstly, in 2014, we have strategy of reform of internal bodies. Then we have conception 100 days of quality of national police by Khatia Dekanaidze. It was her program. And unfortunately, these both documents do not finish, do not complete it even at the third part. And now there is again no document. And Minister of Internal Affairs, they announced a new strategy, like strategy of development of Minister of Internal Affairs 2020, but unfortunately it's a lot abstract document without some concrete, some certain measures. How do we, after 3 years of this reform, how can we evaluate the effectiveness of this reform? So it's a bit chaotic process. We going in some direct, but no one knows what is it direct. And about the elections, which will be in the next year, it will be a very big influensive matter to the police, unfortunately, because we don't have strategy.
I would like to bring the map. I would like my team to show the map of where we've got the new departments of the police in the country. So that, just to explain, there was a pretty big ambition. So these are the cities where the new patrol police stations had been created. In every single regional capital, also we have, for instance, we know that there are issues with smuggling. There is a border with EU in the western Ukraine. So we have in the smaller towns also the new police as well on the front line. These are not regional capitals like Mariupol, but as well towns like Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Severodonetsk there. But this kind of this map looks nice, but really we have 140,000 policemen in the country. So how many of them are really this kind of reformed police? We know there was a process of attestation, accreditation. So let us know.
Yes, it's a very important thing that petrol police, the new petrol police, it's just 12,000. It's
less than 10%.
Yeah, less than 10%. And attestation, it's a mechanism which should dismiss all bad policemen, bad previous workers of militia. But really the result of attestation is just 8% of previous militiaries were dismissed by the result of the attestation. And half of them were returned by the court decision, because the legislation, the regulation of this attestation was has a lack. And every person who were dismissed can, without any evidences, any proofs, return to police, and our country pays them near 55 billion hryvnias because they didn't work this past year after attestation.
This is a pretty huge amount of money, less in dollars, though. Just generally understand, but is it really bad? You know, you really understand that, like when we talked a lot with a lot of foreign experts, you really understand you can't dismiss the whole police. That would be, even could be dangerous. So you need to have the people from the old guard to know it. For instance, that was exactly the case with the head of the national police. He's coming from the old guard, but he knows it compared to the previous head, Hatia Dekanaidze. Like using this opportunity just really give us an understanding, maybe we can somehow assess, or is it too early to assess the actions of particularly the man we've just heard?
Of course, we cannot fire everyone who works in the militia, but 8% or 20% is really a huge difference. And of course, in this situation, we cannot again make this attestation. In this case, all policemen who makes illegal actions, they should be fired. They should be punished by the other law enforcement bodies, and this is another problem about the accountability of the police, that when a policeman committed a crime or some disciplinary offense, which is not crime, it's a less offense, we do not have effective system to punish them, to have them to respond to their actions, because now prosecutor's office, which also not reformed body, they investigate crimes committed by policemen, like tortures, illegal arrests, some bribery, or broken of the right to defense, when a police officer do not allow attorney to meet his client, etc. All these crimes prosecutor office investigates, but all the work to find evidences, to check the facts, is doing police itself. It's the Department of Internal Control, and usually it is the workers, the police officers who work in the cabinets, in the rooms near their colleagues who committed these crimes, and this is not effective, this is not independent body. And our hope is State Bureau of Investigation, which will be working in our country soon. We hope on this.
As also, what we need to say that the biggest thing is as well the reform of the overall reform of the criminal justice and the law enforcement, because you need to have the reform prosecutor office and the reform courts, because we know that there are complaints even by the policemen that, you know, if you speak to some of them, you know, off the record, they would say that we are not always sure that even if we, you know, stop somebody, that the there would be fair justice in the end. And we had a number of cases about the policemen, even the new policemen coming away. So we know the cases that some of the people were more, let's say, disappointed in what they seen. Do you see the normal process? You know, like we know not a lot of not professionals joined this unit, so maybe it was just not for them.
Maybe again it's about some mechanisms to find dishonest person who makes illegal actions, and again it's a question for these bodies which have to control these actions. And you are right that police cannot reform itself in the sphere of criminal justice, because investigator operative units okay, but they just find evidences. They just prepare cases, criminal cases for the trial, and then prosecutor's office checks them, then judge made a decision, and its system has a lot of connections, and without reform the judicial system, without the reform of prosecutor's office, we cannot change the criminal police. And criminal police, it's really it's a very important part of the police. It's a core of the police, because preventing crimes, combating crimes, it is really the main function of the police.
And before we end, what we also understand that you can always complain here with the reason in Ukraine that there is a war going on. You know, the Ministry of Interior has becoming extremely centralized, but there are reasons because there is a National Guard under the Ministry of Interior. Yet, how you can describe the political will and also the role of the Minister of Interior, who is probably today, I'll be very blunt, is one of the, you know, among the 5 most important people in the country.
Of course.
If not among the 3,
yes,
yeah. If not the second, even
yes.
that.
And of course, the war on the East, the social and economic situations, a much amount of illegal weapon in our country, it all made a huge influence to the police work today. The crimes, the level of criminality really rises. It's not just stories from media, it's true. And as what about the Avakov, the Minister of Internal Affairs? It was one step of the reform to depoliticize the position of head of the police. Why we create the separate separate law enforcement body, not Ministry of Internal Affairs, because we want to the European standards divide this function of Ministry of Internal Affairs as political person and head of the police as a manager. And really it's a good step, but now Ministry of Internal Affairs, he still has influence on the legal level. For example, head of the national police should approved his deputies, the chiefs of local police station with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And unfortunately, we have this disbalance because Avakov or any another Minister of Internal Affairs, he still has this influence, and again in the next year when it will be elections, we can meet a very bad situation when Minister Avakov will use police at the previous times in his own wills, in his own interest. It is a situation that can be changed by Parliament. It's just a few amendments to the law on the national police, and this situation will be solved. Unfortunately, the draft of law exists, but Parliament has more important things to do.
And besides, the Minister of Interior is running the second, one of the biggest faction in the parliament. Yes. Okay, thank you. It was Eugene Krapyvin, who is the expert of the reanimation packages of reform, in particular looking at the police reform. And we also, Eugene, thanks a lot for being with us. And we also spoke with Denys Kobzin, director of the Kharkiv Institute of Social Research and a prominent Ukrainian expert on the police reform, as Denys had been following the changes to the law enforcement and the criminal justice system since the mid-90s. He told us why the time could not be better for police reform, but it's up to the Interior Minister to make that happen. Let's have a look.
Denys, speaking in general terms, can we consider the police reform successful? We of course would have to talk about the patrol police and the rest separately, but can we already make some verdicts?
From what I see, the reform in the way it should be done has not yet started. We're still waiting, and not just the ordinary Ukrainians, but our partners in the European Union too. But this requires some serious willpower and going to very dangerous places, especially for the Interior Ministry.
What needs doing? If you've been following this, what do we need to pay attention to?
Every job has to start with a serious independent audit process. The resources need to be calculated, how they're being used, and how reasonable is the budget allocated by the Parliament to the police sector, how willing the Parliament is to cooperate. That would help us understand where the system is failing us and where it might be about to fail us. The results of this audit process need to be known to Ukraine's taxpayers, maybe not in full, but for the most part, most of it.
Has there not been such an audit?
Not to my knowledge. I only heard about the audit that is being carried out in Lviv region. That's the only one. And the police there have undergone a reform and achieved the most success.
Today's Ukrainian society exists in two extremes, betrayal and victory. There are some people in the patrol police who are not satisfied, but we know for sure that there are also people who are trying to do something to change the system from within. Is it possible to make a judgment on whether the reform is heading in the right direction?
In defense of the old Ukrainian militia, it has been overly demonized when the new police were being implemented. The officers of this new patrol police went through the same path as any police or militia recruit before them. 90% of them arrive with gleaming eyes. Most of them do not want to abuse their power or partake in corrupt schemes. They just want to serve and protect. But the system changed them. It's the same for the officers of the new patrol police. Those who do not want to bend to the system quit.
Does anyone stay and fight the system?
Some stay, but I did not witness any strong fighting. There was one case when some female patrol police officers in Kramatorsk fought for their rights when their boss discriminated against them. But the system itself did not change. They've put new faces instead of old ones. But these people are now struggling because throughout the 2 years the reform has been in action, they have been facing the same old problems.
What happens after the audit process?
The decentralization of the system needs to take place. The system is very centralized and is de facto governed by a small group of people. People practically serve their bosses instead of serving the society whom they should be serving. If the head of the police is from Kiev, he will be looking to fulfill the expectations of his Kiev-based leadership. He will pick some deputies who will look up to him. The deputies will then pick their leaders. And that's how the pyramid is built, where everyone has their eyes set on the Ukrainian capital, while they should actually be looking at ordinary citizens living all over Ukraine.
I once talked to a lawyer, an ideologist of the police reform that took place in Georgia during Prime Minister Zurab's life. So after the Rose Revolution in 2003, he studied the Western experience and started it in the same way. The idea was to have a show-off, demonstrative kind of reform of the patrol police that would be approved by the nation, therefore earn some trust credit. After obtaining this trust credit, you can put pressure on the most sensitive topic, the rest of the Interior Ministry, where things are much trickier. But he complained that they never got to stage B, the most important stage. What can you say about the decorative element of changes in Ukraine?
Yes, there was such a decorative element. Of course, everyone was in euphoria. Beautiful cars, beautiful young people. There was a lot of information about how objectively they acted. But it wasn't used to the fullest extent in order to change the rest. A lot of time has been wasted, and we didn't address the key moments.
Okay, so the audit process, then decentralization, then what?
Creating an independent system of collection and analysis of complaints about the police's actions would be an important change in compliance with the global standards. The police officers, and especially their leadership, virtually live in a different world, a world of commands from the top, different operations, shady schemes, and corruption. This world is very different from the values they claim to have and from the problems of ordinary people. If they wanted to file a complaint about the police, not taking a particular action or behaving abnormally, he would not go anywhere. Everyone knows that complaining about the police to the police is a waste of time. You can also complain to the prosecutor's office, but that's a vicious circle. The prosecutor's office would forward the inquiry to the police department that deals with the personnel or internal security. That's pointless too. It's a closed system. It personally deals with the complaints about itself.
And who is to deal with the reform? The minister?
Yes, first and foremost the minister. Especially looking at the role of our interior minister, Ukraine has never seen such an independent interior minister like we have now. He has the resources for major influence. In my opinion, he can talk to the president on equal terms, and had he wanted to, he could have moved reform mountains.
What's stopping him?
Maybe he doesn't have enough willpower or has a different vision. I can't say everything is going badly. There are positive aspects. Some of them are the little changes to the police's work and some positive experience in different regions of Ukraine.
To watch the full version of all our interviews, including the head of the national police and also the people researching the police, please go to our webpage, en.hromadske.ua. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and search Hromadske International. It's some of the hottest, most iconic real estate in London, the grand building of Trafalgar Square, a symbol of Great Britain. But until last week's Paradise Papers leaks, its true owner was unknown. Now, a new investigation by Hromadske's Slidstvo.info investigative unit and the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, has uncovered that this structure belongs to Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk, and its ownership is hidden offshore on the Isle of Man. We explain how Pinchuk won the grand buildings in a British legal battle with two other Ukrainian oligarchs.
The British press has named this trial as one of the most expensive in the history of English law. $2 billion. This is how much Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk demanded in the High Court of London from two other Ukrainian oligarchs, Igor Kolomoisky and Gennady Bogolyubov. They litigated for a profitable Ukrainian company, and finally they entered into a peace agreement, the details of which they refused to disclose, but we uncovered them, and they are really quite impressive. We will show how Ukrainian oligarchs appropriate one of the most expensive real estate objects in the world, and how using offshores they conceal their ownership of this property. All this and more in this special edition of Slidstvo.info on the financial secrets of the Ukrainian elite and those who serve it abroad. In the middle of the steppes in central Ukraine is the city of Kryvyi Rih. It is an industrial giant which stretches over 120 kilometers. It's more like a cluster of workers' settlements than a city. Each settlement has grown around its own industry, factories, mines, or quarries. This is where the largest amount of Ukraine's iron ore deposits are. Because of this, the dust on the road and the water in the puddles is often red. In the 2000s, Ukrainian oligarchs began to divide up the industries in Kryvyi Rih, the wreckage of the Soviet industrial enterprise. Since then, the oligarchs have been firmly entrenched in the global rich list. However, the people living in the suburbs of Kryvyi Rih are as poor as ever. The Kryvyi Rih Iron Ore Combine, or KZRK for short, is one of the largest iron ore companies in Ukraine. The combine uses iron ore extracted from 4 mines 1.5 kilometers deep. This is the same company that was the subject of a 2013 court battle between Viktor Pinchuk on one side and Igor Kolomoisky and his partner Gennady Bogolyubov on the other. Pinchuk argued that he handed over $140 million to Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov in the mid-2000s to buy the combine. However, according to him, he received neither the business nor the money back. Pinchuk estimated a $2 billion profit loss over the years. The state sold the Kryvyi Rih iron ore combine in 2004. The then president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, signed a law under which the 10 most powerful Ukrainian mining and metallurgical companies, which belonged to the state holding company Ukrudprom, were sold for a symbolic sum. President Kuchma's son-in-law, Viktor Pinchuk, tried to take control of the KZRK. However, after 2004, when Kuchma's presidency ended, Pinchuk's influence diminished. KZRK remained in the hands of Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov. Rinat Akhmetov and Vadim Novinsky bought up the rest of the Ukrudprom assets. 3 years after the Euromaidan victory, a parliamentary commission was set up to verify the results of the scandalous privatization of the 2000s. The commission came to some obvious but sad conclusions. Ukrainian oligarchs bought the Ukrudprom companies for almost nothing. Looking at the real value of Ukrudprom's assets, it was almost $20 billion in 2005, but they bought the entire holding, artificially limiting competition for only $400 million. One of these companies, the Kryvyi Rih iron ore combine, was bought by Mr. Kolomoisky's structures from the state for $40 million, even though its actual value was over $1 billion. $40 million, that's as much as the profit made by the combine last year, according to the official report. Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov later sold a share of the combine to Rinat Akhmetov. Between 2005 and 2016, KZRK paid its owners $500 million in dividends. So in order to keep such an attractive enterprise for themselves, Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov had to give Viktor Pinchuk something truly valuable. Obviously, that's what they did. We do not know if Pinchuk received the $2 billion payoff for KZRK. However, the compensation that we were made aware of was more than worthy. The capital of Great Britain, a global financial center, and probably the most attractive place to resolve legal disputes when it comes to big money. A Ukrainian oligarch sued 2 other Ukrainian oligarchs over Ukrainian assets, but not in the Ukrainian court. He chose to take his claim to the Supreme Court in London. However, in January 2016, 3 days before the court hearings began between Pinchuk on one side and Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov on the other, they came to an out-of-court settlement. The details of the deal that took place on that day were kept secret from the public. However, we have now found out what the Ukrainian oligarchs agreed upon in their dispute over an important Ukrainian company. According to the documents Slidstvo.info and the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project received as part of the Paradise Papers leak, Viktor Pinchuk received a more than generous compensation for KZRK. It includes 2 luxury buildings in prestigious areas of London. This is the office of one of the most famous British law firms, Hogan Lovells. They represented Pinchuk in the aforementioned legal dispute. At the start of 2016, shortly before the court settlement, the firm appealed to the international administrator of the offshore company Appleby. Philip Beswick, a senior employee of Hogan Lovells, asked a partner at Appleby, Simon Kane, to urgently take on a new client. The lawyers at Hogan Lovells had a good reason to rush the offshore law registrar, Appleby. The letter was sent on January 20, 2016, 5 days before the court hearing on the case. Obviously, both parties did not want any third parties witnessing clarification of their relationship, especially journalists. Therefore, they sought to come to a settlement as quickly as possible, even before the hearing began. It even mentions the significant monetary payments Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov had to make to Pinchuk, and this money could not go through Ukraine or even Britain, but through the Isle of Man, where they would be taxed at a minimum. After just 2 hours, a response from Appleby arrived, stating that it would be possible to open an offshore account on the Isle of Man, and it would not require much effort. How much did they plan to spend on these 3 accounts? Further developments in the situation show that it was hundreds of millions of dollars. But first, they had to pay for the services of the offshore registrar. However, on February 2nd, 10 days after the announcement of the settlement between Pinchuk, Kolomoisky, and Bogolyubov, another letter from Pinchuk's lawyer arrived from the offshore administrator Appleby. In addition to the monetary payment, Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov clearly offered to cover part of the debt with another attractive asset. The first building which Kolomoisky and Bogolyubov offered to hand over to Pinchuk is an office at 27 Knightsbridge in central London, the prestigious Belgravia area. Opposite the building is the famous Hyde Park, and further down the road is Buckingham Palace. The building itself is 64,000 square feet. Its value at the end of 2015 was estimated at £75,650,000. And its annual income from leasing was £4 million, according to the documents we received. However, the lawyers hired by Pinchuk state that both properties are already registered in a chain of offshore companies from the Isle of Man, and in order to complete the deal, it is necessary to re-register the offshore firms to a new owner. For this, it is planned to create a trust in Jersey, which will be owned by companies on the Isle of Man, and will therefore acquire ownership of the building. The Rio Royal Trophy for Pinchuk is the second building. This is also located in central London. If you look at Google Maps, the center of London is right here, where I am standing, here on Trafalgar Square. This is where the Ukrainian oligarchs settled their debts with one another using among the grandest buildings in the British capital, the grand buildings on Trafalgar Square. For British people, the grand buildings on Trafalgar Square are symbols of the capital. This grandiose structure was once the location of the Grand Hotel. In 1988, it was reconstructed and it is now office spaces, expensive restaurants, and shops. Like other well-known buildings in London, it shows the greatness and glory of the United Kingdom. Opposite this building, Nelson's Column towers overhead. It is a monument to the famous British admiral who defeated the united Franco-Spanish fleet near Cape Trafalgar. Here, in this symbolic place for all Britons, the controversy surrounding 3 Ukrainian oligarchs ends, and we would never have known about it if it weren't for the latest in a series of leaks about offshore secrets, which find their way into the hands of a group of international investigative journalists. To be precise, a year ago this building was valued at £305 million. This is the amount stated in the financial report of the offshore owner company on the Isle of Man, which Slidstvo.info has at its disposal. However, by agreeing to the ownership of the building's offshore scheme, Pinchuk's London lawyers at Hogan Lovells, in their letter to Appleby, add that this structure will be created for tax purposes also.
Following completion, the client will be taking over the control of the 2 above-mentioned Isle of Man companies and will need to continue to administer them in the Isle of Man and also maintain a majority of Isle of Man directors for tax purposes.
We asked Viktor Pinchuk, Igor Kolomoisky, and Gennady Bogolyubov to confirm the data we received and also to comment on whether there were any other conditions to their out-of-court agreement, apart from the transfer of elite London real estate. We also asked why they set up such a complicated offshore ownership structure for these properties and whether it was done to minimize taxes on leasing, buying, or selling them. Igor Kolomoisky responded, saying that he could not comment due to his obligation to comply with the confidentiality condition he agreed to as part of the settlement. We received the same response from Viktor Pinchuk.
Since the Ukrainian independence, Poland has been one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine in Europe. For decades, Ukrainian and Polish academics and intellectuals worked hard in order to overcome historic misunderstandings. To a large degree, they succeeded. During the 90s and 2000, a number of reconciliation initiatives, like honoring Polish military in Ukrainian cemeteries or honest discussion on tragic and controversial events during the Second World War, had taken place with the participation of the Ukrainian and Polish leaders. However, since the Nationalist Law and Justice Party came to power in Warsaw, the 2015 relations have soured over issues of historic memory and politics. Figures regarded as heroes by many in Ukraine, for example, the early 20th century Ukrainian controversial nationalist leader Stepan Bandera, are regarded in Poland as the killers of Poles. Warsaw is angry today about how these figures are increasingly honored by some post-Maidan Ukrainian politicians. This week, Hromadske attended the Warsaw Security Forum. Our correspondent Tatiana Ogarkova spoke with Miriam Lexman, director of the International Republican Institute EU office, about the challenges of historical memory in Ukraine and Poland.
My first question will be a very simple one. What we see, what we observe, is a kind of tension between Ukrainian authorities and Polish authorities. There's an exchange of critical remarks, and the fact is that the object of these critical remarks is historical facts and historical personalities like Bandera. How can you explain that? How can we explain that politicians today are conflicting because of the past?
I think one of the reasons why it's very difficult for especially Central Europe to reconcile with the difficult past is that the past, the difficult conflicts and difficult memories between different nations were frozen during the communist times. I mean, for Central European countries for 40 years, I mean, in terms of Ukraine and Poland, even longer, because obviously, I mean, when Poland became part of the Soviet Union, I mean, it extended the time, where these nations were, I mean, practically it was preserved in such a way that there was no any kind of reconciliation. Unfortunately, many political leaders from the Central Eastern European sphere are using these conflicts in the past for gaining political capital. I mean, and we see this in many countries. We observe this between Slovakia, Hungary, and I can name many other examples. And I think what is important is that the civil society is trying to address it and trying to find ways how to reconcile these conflicts, how to bring the discussion about what actually happened, how to understand the different narratives between different nations, because sometimes it's impossible to end up with the same narrative between two nations who have been in conflict for centuries. But I think what is important is that the people will learn and respect that the other nation has a different opinion on a certain part of history and move on.
Do you think that this story between Ukraine and Poland, this story between two political classes, has a real impact on what citizens of both respective societies think and feel about this collective memory?
Since I'm not neither Ukrainian nor Polish, it's very difficult for me to measure. I meet many Ukrainians and many Poles, but those are maybe those people who are more active in a society. They're more critically thinking about what is happening around them. So obviously, I mean, they're not buying this narrative very easily, and they see a danger in this narrative. On the other hand, I have no idea what impact this has on the kind of general population of Poland and Ukraine. And of course, one meeting between ministers and one word cannot really make enormous damage, but the question now is what is going to happen now? How the society is going to address this, what has happened, and if this is going to be brought in such a way among the citizens and in media and other ways of media, social media mainly, that it will turn these two nations against each other and kind of reinvigorate the past memories, or people will understand that we don't want to be divided on these issues and we should move on. Now we have also many positive examples of support of Poland for Ukraine during the Maidan, and I think people should kind of remember these parts of their history.
We also spoke with Michal Boni, a member of the EU Parliament, about the direction of Ukrainian-Polish ties and the relationship importance at a time of Russian information warfare. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
What are the most important current trends in the relationship between Poland and Ukraine?
You know, I think that we need to have the good relations because it's very important for Ukraine and it's very important for Poland. There are mutual advantages because on the one hand, Ukraine is our brother and is defending us before Russian aggression. If I can say symbolically. On the other hand, I think that Ukrainian needs us in reforming the country, in developing the country. And on the other hand, it's important that Polish-Ukrainian relations could be a very good example for different European countries how important Ukraine is and that Ukraine is in Europe. We are discussing about future membership, but Ukraine is in Europe, mentally, culturally, and so on. So all those political mess, unfortunately done by Polish Minister of External Foreign Affairs and by Polish politicians, I think that that is a political mistake. This is a political mistake if you are looking at the future and if you want to create the good relations between our countries.
Another question. European Union is reforming itself. How do you see the Polish and the European relationship, and in view of this reform specifically?
You know, current Polish government is a little against European Union. So I think that in many activities, this government is not active and not presenting the view. It's the problem with our credibility now, because if we are as not the country, our government is breaking the rule of law, is making the impartiality of public media rather propaganda than information. If there are some new acts and legislations which are against the independence of judiciary system. So this is a problem not only for the European Union and our colleagues and friends from different member states. This is our problem because we are losing our position. Over 20 years we have worked very hardly to create the strong position of Poland among countries of the European Union. And now it's destroyed. It was destroyed. It is destroying. So I think that this is a problem, and this is a problem not only for us, this is a problem for our colleagues and friends from this part of Europe, because there is no leadership to talk with Brussels, yes, very strongly about our interests. So I think that we need to come back to our earlier position. So it means we need to start and come back to the full respect for the rule of law.
And my last question, what is the exact role of Moscow, of Russia, in disinformation about what's happening between Ukraine and Poland?
I want to come back to the first question, if you allow me, because on the other hand, I think that we need to talk together, Polish authorities and Ukrainian authorities. There are many difficult problems from the heritage, from the past. But the only way is to discuss, to explain themselves those problems and to solve the problems, not to create the new mental war between.
Last month, Kyrgyzstan went to the polls to elect a new president. The race was close, but ultimately former Prime Minister Sooronbay Jeenbekov, you can see him on the screen, the incumbent's chosen successor, scored a clear victory. But then Kyrgyzstan's independent Klob news site discovered what they consider a clear sign of electoral interference. In the run-up to the vote, an obscure real estate website called Samara.kg suddenly moved to a Kyrgyz state service. There, it likely gained access to tons of personal data on citizens of Kyrgyzstan. Klopp now believes Samara was used to identify people susceptible to pressure. Election workers then logged their progress, bribing the voters to cast their ballots for Jeenbekov in the site. My colleague Matthew Kupfer sat down with Klopp co-founder Bektur Iskender to learn more about the investigation and what it tells us about the Kyrgyz presidential race.
So recently, Klopp carried out an investigation into a website called Samara.kg, a rather unusual site that appears to have put pressure on voters to cast their ballots for Soronbay Jeenbekov in the election last month, and he subsequently won the vote. So tell us, how did Klopp find out about this, and what is this investigation about?
We found it quite unexpectedly, to be honest, the day before the election, when one of our editor-in-chief, LDR, he saw this video that was posted by the guy who is anonymous, and we still don't know what is his name, who hacked this whole system. And he hacked this whole website called Samara, and then he released a video where he actually explained what this website was about. We decided that, okay, it's probably not worth of our attention. But just in case, just to double check, we decided to send a request to our friends from Curium, the Swedish-based NGO, which has access to these tools, very, very sophisticated but very expensive tools, which allow you to see the history of the domain name with a very, very high precision. Like you basically can see it almost, with a day-to-day kind of accuracy, which server was each domain connected to, which server was each domain working with every day. So they checked Samara.kg using these tools, and then 2 days later they sent us, all this very detailed information about where it was hosted, and they basically found out that on the 13th of September 2017, Samara.kg was redirected from a private hosting server to the server which belonged to the government of Kyrgyzstan, to the state registration service. And then it was hosted there until the moment that this Super Mario hacker, that was his nickname, when he hacked the system, or she. We actually don't know even the gender.
So what did the Samara.kg site do during the election? Let's talk a bit about what its function was.
So according to the video that was posted by the hacker, Samara.kg was used to collect information about a certain number of voters, and mostly because there was this personal identification numbers there, which are given to every Kyrgyz citizen. And in this personal identification number, we can see year of the birth of the person. And many people who were in the system, they are young, and we think they are students. And students are one of these vulnerable groups of people in Kyrgyzstan who have been used during the last several elections. And there is something important about Kyrgyzstan elections. Because of this reform that we had during with our elections, it's very difficult right now to basically draw the figures for the pro-government candidates, the ones that they would want. It's much more difficult to manipulate, the outcome of the election. And that's why what we assume they needed was they actually needed people to vote for a certain candidate and, to put this ballot into the box. And but how do you do that? How do you manage this whole huge group of people to vote for a certain candidate? You need to build a whole system which would help you to control how you basically buy votes, how you use this so-called administrative resource. And of course, one of the best and most convenient ways to control the system is by setting up something which you can easily check online, where every person who works for your campaign has his or her own account, where they basically mark who they gave money to. And that's what we assume the system was used for.
So you said you think that the campaign workers likely paid people and then marked that in Samara. Do you know for sure that that's what they did? Were there other means of pressure on the people, or?
Well, we interviewed actually several campaign workers from Jane-Bekov's campaign who confirmed to us that it was like this. But unfortunately, every one of them is, of course, giving anonymous interviews, so they don't want their names to be revealed. And that's how they described. We published a whole interview with one of these campaign workers who described us the way it was working. So yes, the main goal was to mark who of the people are being paid. And then, of course, then there was this another way of putting pressure on people by, spreading this rumor that it is possible to see who everyone voted for.
Coming back to Samara, the site itself didn't just appear, at least a site at that web address didn't just appear on the day of the election. It existed before, and maybe it still exists today. What was it before?
So before the 13th of September, it was a website of real estate agency.
And did it actually work as a real estate agency?
We actually don't know, to be honest. We managed to check this out again through digital traces that were left by the domain, but we don't know. We know the only thing is that it's registered on the name of Uchkenbek Tashbayev, a former government official and a former minister, actually. And Uchkenbek Tashbayev is also one of the key people at the construction company called Ikhlas, so he is in these circles of real estate anyway. But the thing is that, so the website represented, this real estate agency before the 13th of September. Then it became, this database of people who are being paid for to vote for someone, or possibly for Jane-Bekov, I guess. Then it was hacked. And then for 10 hours or so, it was showing the video done by this Super Mario hacker.
Mm-hmm.
Then...
that he put there.
Yeah, that he put there. Because he managed to kind of redirect the domain name samara.kg to the server that he was controlling. But then the control over the server was restored by people who were running the system. But the day after the election was over, this website now shows, the company that does, laundry for carpets or some carpet laundry.
Like it cleans rugs.
Yeah,
carpet cleaner.
Carpet cleaning service. Yeah, exactly. Carpet cleaning service. This is what it is right now. And the funny thing is that we kind of tried even to clean a carpet, But the thing is that, every time we were calling, they were telling us that they are not cleaning every carpet, that, they clean only huge carpets. So we tried to find a huge carpet to clean. But then, we decided that it's more important to publish the investigation now, that we cannot wait until we clean the carpet. Because anyway, unfortunately, what is difficult for us in this investigation is that we are mainly talking about quite complicated technical terminology. Mm-hmm. And we tried to write the first part of the investigation that we have already published. We tried to write it as simply as possible, which took a lot of, editorial work. Mm-hmm. Still, I guess many people in Kyrgyzstan don't really understand the concept of what was wrong. And so far, what we managed to prove was wrong, that some website which had, a suspicious database of people was hosted at the government server for 1 month. This is what we definitely managed to prove. This is what we are 100% sure about.
Interesting.
And for the full version of our interviews, go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and search there Hromadske International. And from the entire team of Hromadske International, thank you for watching. We are here to explain Europe and Eastern Europe for you. Thank you and goodbye.